Hello everyone. I'm Brian Andrade. I'm an adjunct professor with the Aerospace Engineering Department at San Jose State. And similar to what we just heard, I went through and implemented specifications grading in the lab component of one of the core aerospace engineering courses in the department. So just a little bit of background here. I actually teach two courses in the aerospace engineering department, one in the fall, one in the spring, and these are core classes in the aerospace engineering department. Aerospace engineering, obviously knowing about aerodynamics is pretty important. And I've actually implemented specifications grading in the lab component of both of these at this point. So the first class in the fall is more fundamentals of aerodynamics and fluid mechanics. And then the course that I'm teaching now in spring is related to specialized knowledge of airfoils and wings. So most, but not all, of the students are in their first year of upper division coursework in the program. I do get a few master students that are coming from disciplines other than aerospace engineering. And I teach both components of this class. There's a lab and a lecture component, and I am the instructor for both of those. However, I've been applying the specifications grading only to the lab component. So that means for the purposes of the lab, similar to what we heard before, there's several labs through the course of the semester and lab reports written based on those labs. And then these reports are what specifications grading is applied to. The lecture remains under the more conventional grading scheme for the moment. And I did this for a couple of reasons. Primarily, or the big reason was so I don't try and make this complete comprehensive shift and mess it up in a serious way. We're here to teach the students and aid them in learning as best as possible. And I don't want to mess it up in a very serious way and have the students suffer for that. So a limited application on the thing that I felt would most immediately benefit from specifications grading is what I chose to run with. Especially because in my experience, reports are the thing that are most subjective in grading. Like a math problem, the result is the result, right? You got it right or you didn't. But a report, there's so many things that go into it. There's a lot of question marks, and students like to try and nitpick. It's like, I should have gotten a couple percentage points more here or there. And specs grading completely removes that from the equation. So the way I implemented specifications grading was I didn't quite go to just straight pass or no pass. I went to a 3-point system with a high pass, low pass, or needs revision score for each of the reports in question. And revisions for these reports are encouraged. They're not during the nature of lab reports. Practically, they can get about 2 revisions in. But I don't think I've seen more than one group in the 2 semesters I've used this need more than 1 revision to get what they viewed as an acceptable score. And acceptable is important because in order to pass the class, also like previously, the lecture and lab component have 1 comprehensive grade for both of them. To receive an overall passing grade for the course, they must receive a low pass in all of these lab reports. You can't pass the course and have a needs revision in any of them. So the revision is important because otherwise it would be a very, very, so to speak, sudden death sort of scenario for the students. And the revisions, they don't want to do the revisions, but I think they like having that fail safe in there if something does go wrong. Or they've got extraneous things that just prevent them from doing a good job the first time, or any of several different things that could happen. And the high pass versus low pass versus a needs revision is based on the rubric categories that we're trying to assess. You know, can they do experiments? Can they talk about how the experiments are done? Can they process the data from the experiments? Can they explain what these results mean and how they relate to the physical phenomena underpinning the experiment? These are the sorts of things that show up on the rubric and that they're assessed on. If you do really well in a couple of them, you can get a high pass while being otherwise adequate. However, if you completely skip a category or do extremely poorly, they'll need to revise that lab report. So everyone has to come up to that minimum threshold of competence to pass the class and receive a low pass in all these lab reports. So overall, again, I did this in fall and spring this semester and previous, and the reception was generally positive, although in fall there were some serious things to resolve. I've resolved some of them. I think students, from what I've heard, like to be able to use the feedback they get on the reports. The feedback is something that they usually get on things like this, but almost never do they really get the chance to use that feedback for a very similar thing, because there's, for the most part, no resubmissions in general in other courses. So they like that part. But the thing that needed improvement, specifically in last fall, I think I've done a lot better this semester, is they wanted greater clarity out of basically, what am I expecting for a low pass? What am I expecting for a high pass? And by process elimination, what will result in a needs revision grade? So I've done some work on that and improved it, although there's certainly still room for improvement with the rubrics. So let me wrap up with what I think this experience means and how I can take this information, move it forward to hopefully best serve the learning outcomes of the students here. So I think that taking the emphasis off of points, like a 0 to 100 point scale, helps the report quality. I definitely probably should do a more rigorous comparison between reports I received in previous semesters and during this specifications grading revision of the course. But I feel subjectively like the overall report quality has increased, probably because they're less concerned or less able to think about, it's like, okay, if I completely skip or only do a very cursory job at this section, I'll still probably pass. They can't do that anymore. So the overall quality has come up, but at the same time, they're not worried about making up, or they're not worried about doing necessarily excellent in any one category. It's so to speak, pulling up the entire quality of the report collectively rather than bits and pieces of it at once. Again, kind of subjective, but that's my interpretation of that part. What I learned from this is definitely, and this is something that I personally need to improve on moving forward, is that the rubrics need to be clear and have clear delineations for what these categories, excellent, satisfactory, or needs revision, represents. And students, I think, are receptive, and especially when like the logic and the motivation of it is somewhat explained up front. And when the kind of pitfalls that I've mentioned have been addressed, I think they like it quite a bit, because ultimately they get the power to decide, it's like, okay, is a low pass enough? Or do I want to put in that extra effort and get the high pass? Which in their eyes puts it back in their hands, which ultimately it was all along, for the most part, at least major parts of it. But it makes it a lot more transparent. It makes them feel like that a lot more, I think, which they like, because different people have different scenarios. What one person views as satisfactory might not be satisfactory for another, and vice versa. So I think that flexibility suits especially the sort of students that we get for my course.